This is Peanut. This is a squirrel that has pretty much been beloved by the world. A man rescued a baby squirrel several years ago when the mother was killed by traffic. And so he raised this little adorable squirrel and named it Peanut. And in the state of New York, you have to have a license if you want to be a sanctuary. He was in the current process of getting him to be legally established as an educational animal. But something happened. He also had a raccoon that he was planning to, once it was recovered from its injury, release back. And the state of New York seized Peanut and the raccoon and immediately euthanized them, much to the horror of the beloved fans of this adorable little squirrel that's seen in many cute videos around the world, and adorable little accessories, and doing cute little things and videos. Here's the thing of why they're saying that they did this. Because allegedly Peanut bit somebody. And so, what's the protocol to euthanize an animal that's suspected to have rabies? Well, of course you don't euthanize every animal that snips or bites somebody. It doesn't say how serious the bite was. It doesn't say what led to the biting. Was the animal provoked? Was the animal frightened? Was it acting any other way? So, here's the facts about rabies. Do you automatically euthanize an animal? Because they have to, if they suspect that an animal has rabies, they have to euthanize it and then do some tests immediately so that they can inform the victim, because rabies is fatal. So the treatment for rabies is pretty brutal, and they have to give the information immediately to the medical team of the victim. But you don't just automatically euthanize an animal just because it bites somebody. There has to be clinical signs. They have to suspect that it has rabies. So what's the chances of this particular animal of actually having rabies? It doesn't state whether or not the animal was vaccinated, like dogs and cats, domesticated pets, they get vaccinated. There's no information given on whether or not this particular animal was in fact vaccinated. But the likelihood of exposure of this beloved little pet of a squirrel who was being, it would have been an education animal. That's the license he was trying to get for this animal. So the fact that that process was in process, I think that legally he had grounds to keep the animal since he was working on getting that license. He wasn't out as a squirrel, out wandering the woods, being exposed to various things. He was never out of his sight. But how exactly do animals get rabies? What are the risks of animals getting rabies? What do they have to be exposed to get rabies? Can they just touch something that another animal that has rabies touches? It's very unlikely that this animal had rabies, just for the fact that he was always with and indoors his owners. He wasn't out with other animals. So like cats, they go out and they wander. Dogs sometimes get loose and run about. But this little guy, he wasn't exposed. So it's very unlikely that he had rabies. And again, there's no knowledge on whether or not that he had any kind of vaccination. So if there was any kinds of signs, the clinical signs of rabies, then they would be justified to euthanize it. And absent that information being given, it's kind of hard to tell. But I think that if there was no signs, the clinical signs that are required for them just to euthanize this squirrel and the raccoon, I think that New York could be accused of animal abuse. A famous, beloved squirrel with no clinical signs whatsoever of rabies, to euthanize it? Now I'm going to share the information for veterinarians' CDC website on what the signs are. Clinical signs of rabies in animals. Rabies virus causes acute encephalitis in all warm-blooded hosts, and the outcome of infection is always nearly fatal. Early signs include abnormal behavior, lethargy, fever, vomiting, anorexia, ataxia, weakness, self-mutilation, rapid progression to cerebral and cranial nerve dysfunction, paralysis, seizures, swallowing difficulties, excessive salivation, and aggression. Managing an animal that has bitten a person. Animals showing clinical signs consistent with rabies should be immediately euthanized and tested. So they have to show clinical signs with rabies to immediately euthanize them. So why isn't the article about this beloved squirrel being euthanized, why is it not saying that it was showing clinical signs of rabies? They will quarantine the animal. If signs of illness develop during the 10 days following the bite or other exposure, then you report the situation to the local health department. If rabies is suspected, euthanize the animal and contact public health officials to coordinate testing and improve rabies laboratory. So you don't just automatically euthanize an animal because it bites somebody, even if it's a squirrel. Other animals. Report bites from other animals to the local health department. Management of exposures will depend on the species, bite circumstances, rabies epidemiology in the area, the animal's health history, and potential rabies exposure. So, depending on the circumstance, in this particular circumstance, Peanut was a beloved pet that was kept indoors and was with the sight of the owner all the time. It wasn't allowed outdoors and running loose with other animals. So the risk of it having rabies would be low. And again, whether or not there's even a vaccine for squirrels, or if it was vaccinated, but it wasn't even exhibiting any kind of signs. So if he wasn't exhibiting any kind of signs whatsoever of rabies, and they just euthanized that animal and the raccoon, that should be treated as animal abuse. And the New York, whoever department did this, should be held accountable. But if he was exhibiting signs that they have documented, then the steps that they took would have been appropriate. But if they just euthanized him without any signs of rabies whatsoever, what a sad, brutal thing that they did to a beloved pet by the world, basically. What do you think?